Hello everyone, my name is Cider, and welcome to the complete Wyverncounter guide. There is a lot of information in this, so there are timestamps for you in the description. Feel free to skip ahead, and let's get right into it. Starting off with the very basics, Wyverncounter is a heavy bowgun ignition ammo that you can equip on every heavy bowgun under the second equipped special ammo tab. To use Wyverncounter, you pull out your weapon, switch to ignition mode by pressing B on Xbox, circle on PlayStation, or F on PC. Then hold down Y on Xbox, triangle on PlayStation, and R on PC to crouch down, aim, and charge Wyverncounter, up to 3 levels. The levels in Wyverncounter are a little hard to differentiate. Just by tapping it once and letting it go with no sparks, that's level 1. You see little sparks, that's level 2. And if you hold it down for long enough and see 2 sparks, that's 1 and that's the second spark, that's level 3. If you miss the timing on the offset, you will still do 1 tick of damage. And on a successful offset, although you don't have a special cinematic follow-up, you will do 2 damage numbers instead of 1, and the amount increases depending on your charge level, and from what I can tell, the damage appears to be fixed damage, ignoring hit zones similar to Wyvern Blast. Keep in mind while charging Wyverncounter, you can roll to cancel the charge but you cannot guard. In Title Update 4, Wyverncounter also got a huge utility buff, in the form of recharging ignition gauge on a successful offset. The Wyverncounter itself consumes 1.5 bars of gauge out of a maximum of 10. Successfully offsetting at level 1 recharges 3.5 bars, level 2 recharges 4 bars, and level 3 recharges 4.5 bars. The weapon skill focus at level 3 recharges an additional 0.75 bars and also increases the charge speed of Wyverncounter. I have also noticed that when you do get an offset knockdown, you usually gain a lot more gauge than normal. I don't have the exact numbers or clip, but it's something to keep in mind and you can probably notice it in my other videos. I'm not sure if this is common knowledge, but I also discovered that having the corrupted mantle equipped increases gauge recovery, speed/amount. You can see here both attacks are fully charged with focus 3. The scenario with the corrupted mantle recovered 8 bars as opposed to the 5.25 bars when not using corrupted mantle. Also note that the corrupted mantle wasn't even charged yet. Honestly never knew that. Apologies if this was common knowledge. Anyways, this gauge recovery makes the offset synergize much better with Wyvernheart and Wyvernpiercer, allowing you to stay in ignition mode for longer or even the whole hunt. If you do run out of gauge, I recommend using exhaust ammo or other ammos to quickly recharge just enough gauge for another offset. And you can also do the double charged focus strike on wounds to spam Wyvernheart or Piercer during knockdowns. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my Wyvern Blast guide video that goes more in depth over gauge recovery for heavy bowgun. Moving on to basic properties of the heavy bowgun offset. Property 1. You can hold the offset for around 7 seconds, making it stupidly lenient, but if you have focus 3 on, you can only hold it for around 6 seconds, which is still pretty damn long. Property 2. This offset has a ridiculously long hyper armor duration, as you can see from the clip here. Along with the hyper armor, this heavy bowgun offset doesn't appear to have the stagger animation when you offset an unoffsetable attack like Greatsword or Swax. Property 3. This offset has a really long range, allowing you to comfortably offset attacks from further away or even attacks not directed at you, making this offset really enjoyable and relatively consistent to spam even in multiplayer. It also has a weirdly long lingering hitbox, I think. In this clip, you can see the target dummy being offset. I only have 1 damage number, so I'm not really sure if that counts as a proper offset or not. It's just kinda weird, but I have seen this phenomenon once in a proper hunt. Property 4. Here are 2 things that affect how fast you can pull out an offset after an offset. Number 1. After an offset, make sure to input a direction and hold down the offset button to pull out the offset as fast as possible. Having no directional input for some reason makes it take forever, but most people do that by default anyway. Number 2, if you successfully offset an attack, you will pull out slightly faster than when you fire blanks, by about 13 frames from my testing, but hey, every little bit matters. Expanding on the hyper armor, using the ridiculously long hyper armor from the offset, you can hyper armor roars and unoffsetable attacks with ease, as well as easily triggering Counter-Strike and Resentment at once. But as cool as it is to hold your ground being in an unmovable fortress, it isn't the best idea to always hyper armor through them, as you might be 13 frames too slow in pulling out for the next follow-up attack. And of course, you might also die. I also wouldn't hyper armor those attacks if your gauge is low, as they don't recover ignition gauge, and ideally you don't ever want to leave your ignition gauge, if possible. For these attacks and roars, I will usually utilize them to proc Adrenaline Rush or Offensive Guard, and only offset hyper armor if it's the only option. With offsets come offset knockdowns. The mechanic of offset knockdowns seem to generally be understood as some sort of status that builds up, and when the threshold is passed, a knockdown occurs and the monster's threshold increases. I did some egregious testing, and here are some results. Offset knockdowns seem to mainly depend on the star level and possibly the monster. The strength level, purple stars, the weapon choice, and damage of the offset don't appear to affect when you get the knockdowns, but there does seem to be a pattern of sorts. Disclaimer, I only did testing on a very small amount of hunts, but here are the rough patterns I pieced together. The first and second knockdowns are triggered by the first and third offsets respectively. The third knockdown is 3 to 4 offsets after that, so offset number 6 to 7. The fourth knockdown is usually 4 to 5 offsets more, usually 5, so offset number 11 to 12. And from the fifth knockdown and onwards, it takes 6 to 7 more offsets for the next knockdown. In my tests, the most amount of knockdowns I got was 8, at 37 offsets on a 9-4 Arkveld. There possibly is a higher threshold or pattern, but that would take 50 plus offsets in a hunt. You would literally need to kill a monster using only offsets, and maybe even use the low damage mode along with that. Basically, you won't, and really shouldn't, ever get to 50 offsets for one monster. Armed with this knowledge, and during a multiplayer hunt, if the monster is good, you usually get, I would say, 20 to 25 offsets quite easily, so that means you can probably guarantee 5 to 6 short knockdowns for the whole squad, which is quite incredible. Moving on from the statistics, now I've admitted previously in a Wyverncounter build video that this playstyle is super risky, as you are letting yourself eat a whole bunch of chip damage while intentionally pulling out the offset, which is a bit of a long animation, while playing a gunner weapon that takes more damage than any other offset weapon. So here are a few tips that will hopefully keep you alive. Number 1, the biggest tip I have for you is you will need to learn the hell out of the monster's movesets, and learn which combos you can survive with a combination of guarding, offsetting, and evading. I do plan on making videos on how to use Wyverncounter on specific monsters, but for now I will go over 2 examples. First, this Arkveld 3-hit combo, where he sweeps his chains right and left, then down. He can't offset all 3, and it's safer to just offset one then run away, but you can offset the first sweep, roll the second sweep, then offset the last chain slam. The second example I have is against Steve's 6-hit combo. He does 2 fast claw kicks while standing on the ground, then does 2 far slams, then does the double flying slap. For this combo, you can offset the first fast claw, then dodge or guard the second. Immediately pull out your offset for both of the far slams, then for the double slap, you can offset the first, then guard the second. So when you are learning a new monster using Wyverncounter, remember to make use of guarding and evading. There will be a lot of trial and error, And even myself, there are a bunch of monsters that I haven't really fully figured out how to fight using offset spamming. One more basic tip: if you do get interrupted by a roar, whether because you were caught off guard or you failed a roll while trying to trigger Adrenaline Rush, do not try to offset the next attack. You will not have time to pull out your offset, so prepare to block whenever you get staggered by a roar. Moving on, here are some advanced things you could try to incorporate into your own gameplay. Firstly, it's not really a tip, but you can perform perfect offsets which completely negate damage, though I'm not entirely sure how it is triggered and I can't consistently trigger them. It is easier to trigger using melee offset weapons, but since Wyverncounter has extra range, I'm not really sure how that interacts with perfect offsetting. Instead, for a heavy bowgun, you should make use of that extra range on Wyverncounter, firing off the offset earlier than you would with other melee weapons. It allows you to pull out your follow Wyverncounter earlier. It is a small change, but it does make a big difference. Another tip in a similar vein is making use of the recoil and the range of the offset to avoid getting hit while still landing effective offsets. This is relatively niche and I haven't figured out all the ways to use this tech, but it's definitely possible. For example, you could use this when you are offsetting Raidow's wing dragging attacks. Those are very well telegraphed and are relatively easy to dodge just by moving left or right a little. So instead of aiming the offset directly at Raidow's wings, aim slightly diagonal to the side, then let go of the offset, which should be able to successfully offset and recoil you out of the way of the attack. Also, funny thing, using the recoil of Wyverncounter, you can slightly turn or drift, although this you would need to move your camera quite quickly, so I'm not sure how hard it is to use on controller, and it's probably not particularly useful, but it's kinda cool. One last thing about staying alive: the biggest threat to a Wyverncounter user is not the large monster, it's these little bastards, the Gagios, the Paragrill, and especially the Porcaplume. These little critters quite often do the smallest attack against you and knock you out of charging Wyverncounter, exposing you to the large monster. If you see any of them, kill on sight. Hopefully these tips will help you stay alive more using Wyverncounter, and look forward to future monster-specific guides. The last thing I want to cover in this video are the playstyles you can choose while using Wyverncounter. There are 4 styles that can be mixed and matched together, and they are Guard Focus, Evasion Focus, Wyvernpiercer Hybrid, and Wyvernheart Hybrid. Firstly, going over Guard and Evade Focus, these 2 styles are self-explanatory, one being when you don't or can't offset, you guard, and the other being if you don't or can't offset, you evade. I made these 2 categories because unless you are going against super hard monsters that require specific combos like Seregios, most of the time you can choose one or the other. The styles also influence what skills you want, namely Offensive Guard or Adrenaline Rush. Although you can definitely have both on one set, I have issues trying to maintain both at the same time. It's definitely a skill issue on my part, and you could also treat Adrenaline Rush as more of a passive thing that happens a couple times in a hunt, but for me it's easier if I just focus on one or the other. Generally I've used Guard Focus more, as it is easier and theoretically increases your damage more, though for a shorter duration. While for Evade Focus, I'll be honest, I haven't used it too much. Another issue with Evade Focus is that you really want a 5 evade window, as the heavy bowgun roll is somewhat hard to time, and it's very punishing to miss. You might ask, well, wouldn't Guard Focus want guard and guard up? Well, I would personally say no. The biggest reason being, with an offset playstyle, out of every attack, you most likely are going to offset or hyper armor 60 to 70% of the attacks, while only guarding or evading if necessary for specific hard combos, where hopefully you'll perfect guard or most likely only take 1 to 2 hits. It is still a very good option if you want to be more safe in general, or against specific monsters like Steve and the Gypris. Those 2 monsters specifically, I would say, benefit a lot more from guard and guard up. as you do block a lot more of their attacks. So generally just adjust your build to match your preferred playstyle and comfort level. These two styles are mostly interchangeable, so feel free to pick which one you prefer or enjoy more. One last thing is for guard focus, you can choose to eat the Kunafa meal for Defender High, and for evade focus, you should eat the Azus meal for 3 extra evade window, and also makes it easier to fit 5 evade window into your build. Now on to Wyvernheart vs Wyvernpiercer. If I were to do a blanket statement saying which is better in combination with Wyverncounter, I would say Wyvernpiercer is better. This is because Wyvernpiercer is much faster than Wyvernheart. You just stand still for half a second, shoot, and you're dealing max damage as long as you don't miss, allowing you to intertwine piercer shots in between offsets really easily. Wyverncounter on the other hand has a wind-up animation before shooting, and the damage of Wyvernheart also takes 2 to 3 bars of ignition gauge to wind up as well, making the amount of time and gauge required for Wyvernheart to do max damage more than Wyvernpiercer. But, a very big but, the real answer to this question is, it is very monster dependent. And with that, let's go over the field guide. Chatakabra is good, plenty of melee attacks, I recommend using Wyvernheart. Cheese also has a bunch of melee attacks, perfect for offsetting. Both ignitions would work fine on our beloved chicken. Oliverina is a bit too slow in my opinion, and she runs away quite a lot, so you're better off using pure Wyvernheart instead of this offset playstyle. Kongvala has a decent amount of melee attacks, but I would just use Wyvern Blast instead, just blast him into the ground. Battlehara is just not a good matchup. Doshikuma is a great matchup, but it takes a bit of learning, and he is a bit too fast, so it's easier and more fun in multiplayer. And use Wyvernheart. Uthduna is one of the best matchups possible. Super fun, use Wyvernpiercer. Rampapalo, never tried, probably a bad matchup. Rado is a decent matchup. In his case, I've had much better results using Wyvernheart over Piercer. Nersilla, I've never tried, but I would imagine it's probably a decent matchup. Hirabami, I've never really tried either, but you can chain knock them down using flashes anyway, so better off using other builds. Ajargan, I've never done his 9-star solo, but it is quite fun in multiplayer. You can even offset his Sonic the Hedgehog ultimate attack. I'm not sure which ignition is better on him. Nutra so far has been quite decent, but I haven't fully learned how to use Wyverncounter against her. Both ignitions are decent and haven't really decided which is better. Guardian Doshikuma, same as Doshikuma, pretty good, use Wyvernheart. Guardian Rathos, never really tried but should be alright as well. Jendahad, no. Guardian Odogaron, he should be good, but right now, without a stronger version, he just falls down a lot, making it bad for Wyverncounter. Surubu, never really tried, but it should be a good matchup, but it will take a bit of learning. Zoshia, no for obvious reasons. Yoncut Ku. Using Wyverncounter against his 9-star was actually surprisingly good, and I recommend using Wyvernheart. Jivso should be a good matchup as well. Use Wyvernheart and just focus the head, because you can't Wyverncounter the flash I don't think. Rathian should be a pretty good matchup. Guardian Fulgur is a decent matchup, but I think his moveset's a little harder to learn. Normal Rathlos, same as the other Raths. Should be pretty good, but there are definitely better playstyles. Now, Gravios, I've never tried, but I would assume it's quite a bad matchup, because this build doesn't have a good way of breaking its stomach, and his citizens are just bad. So, just use Waterbogan. Pelagonga's a pretty good matchup, use Wyvernheart. Gorus is a surprisingly alright matchup in multiplayer. He has a lot of offsettable attacks, and from my limited experience, I prefer using Wyvernpiercer against him. Solo isn't impossible, I just haven't learned that hunt fully just yet. Arkveld, one of the best matchups possible, use Wyvernpiercer. Misu is also in a weird spot. I don't think I know him well enough to fully offset him, and he's also just fast. So right now I would just say, at best, he's a really hard matchup to learn, but at worst he might just be a bad matchup for Wyverncounter. I do recommend using Wyvernheart instead. It's just really hard to position well to use Wyvernpiercer most of the time. Serangios. Never do him solo unless you have a very tailored build for him, or if you have a death wish. He is stupidly hard to offset solo, but in multiplayer, he's really fun. And like, really, really fun. Either ignition is alright for him in my opinion. Legiacris. Honestly a really bad matchup. He has horrible shot hit zones, and the hit checks he does aren't offsetable. The supercharged double dash thing I don't think is offsetable either. Just stick with Wyvern Blast. No. Also no. Now special mentions. The Arch-Tempered. AT Ray Down, same with normal Ray Down, is pretty good. Make sure to focus the Fog Ray on his wings, especially multiplayer, to remove the extra attacks when he's outside of his nest. AT Uthduna. Do not do this guy solo. A lot of his attacks have really long durations, like his charge and barrel roll, and those do a lot, and I mean a lot of chip damage. Like, I think the barrel roll itself can do half your health and chip damage. Even in multiplayer it's quite dangerous, but more possible, but you're probably better off using a more Wyvernpiercer focused build instead of offset focus. AT New Udra. Once again, I highly advise against doing her solo. She is just way too fast for offset spamming. In multiplayer it's much more doable, but even then it is a really hard fight to learn using offset. But I reckon if you do learn it, it could be quite fun. And AT Jindahat, for obvious reasons, don't use an offset build, just use Wyvern Blast. And lastly, here's to hoping AT Arkveld would be a great offset monster, just like normal Arkveld, so I can beat him up relentlessly. And that is everything. My god, was this video a pain to put together. Wyverncounter is obscenely complex with a lot of tiny details, and it took a lot of testing to figure everything out. And honestly, half the time I would test something, get results only to find something new to test. I really hope you guys learned something. I know I did in the making of this video. The most interesting thing being the offset knockdown patterns. I now can probably relatively accurately predict when I get a offset knockdown, which is quite fun. Also, I do want to apologize to fellow controller players out there, because although I've never tried, I can imagine it being really hard to spam offsets, especially against some monsters like Gore, that require you doing 180-degree turns all the times. Unless if you have ridiculously high sensitivity, it kinda sucks, like, it's just worse for controller users. And it also sucks that you can't aim Wyverncounter without focus mode. I wish you could not use focus mode and just aim using the left joystick, or WASD. I might try some hunts out to experience it in the future, so you guys could just watch me die a lot. But anyways, best of luck to everyone trying out this playstyle, and if you have more experience, tips, or questions, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Look forward to more Wyverncounter monster specific guides, and of course AT Arkveld in the very near future. That is all from me. I'll see you in the next video.